بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وخاتم النبيين نبينا محمد وآل آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بالإحسان إلى يوم الدين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brothers and sisters, I want to talk to you today about an issue. And this is an issue I was doing some side reading. And I ran across something that I wanted to share with all of you. Because we're constantly we're being bombarded with things in the news and people talking about Islam is barbaric and, it's this and it's that and there's no rahmah and this. All the way up until nowadays, everyone's talking about slavery and did this happen during slavery and did this not happen? And people's excuses are, well, people brought the slaves from the Muslims. The Muslims were selling slaves. Tayyib. First and foremost, before I get into this, we need to understand, because it's important for us to understand this as individuals, for our own understanding, as well as for us to understand this so that we can explain it to other people. The first thing we need to know is that we have to separate between two things. The first of these things is the actions of the Muslims, the statements of the Muslims, what we hear and see from the Muslims, and what's legislated in Islam. We can't blame Islam for what some of the Muslims have done. Now, we understand that there have been some things that have been done over time that were incorrect. But we have to attribute those things to the people and not to the religion. We need to allow everyone else to understand this as well. So, I want to talk to you a little bit about slavery in Islam, even though I don't know anywhere in the world that it exists Islamically, or where it's permissible that it exists nowadays in our day and time. Right now, what I want to talk to you about is how slavery was. What it was in Islam, not with some of the Muslims, but what it was in Islam. Because people try to make it look like the slavery that people went through in America and some of these other places was the same slavery that was legislated in Islam. And it was different as night and day. And this is what I want to show you today. You're going to see that even inside of slavery, there was so much rahmah that the Muslims were commanded to have with slaves, whether they were Muslims or non-Muslims. It didn't matter, because the treatment was the same. And how this is different from that which we've seen in a lot of our countries. And that which some of us still see. Tayyib? Now, I'm going to read you a little bit about what Ibn Qasim was saying about in one of his books about slavery and what's legislated in Islam. And I'm going to allow you yourself to compare this picture. Now, this is one of the major fuqaha of his time. How he describes what slavery is in Islam and what you know slavery to be. And you're going to see that there's no comparison between the two. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Now what he says here. فَيُطْعِمُ رَقِيقٌ مِنْ غَالِبِ الْخُطُوطِ مَاشِي. He says that the slave is given the type of staple foods, wheat and barley and things along these sorts, that everybody else eats. That which is just known in that country or that land. They're not giving garbage. They're giving what everyone else eats. And also, this is the point that he brought that I didn't mention just yet. It's upon the one that owns a slave to take care of them and pay for them, to provide for them, And this is what he's going to talk about here. He said when it comes to feeding them, they have to be given the food that everyone else eats basically in the country or in the land, in the place where we're at. That which is known and eaten by everyone else. Now, he doesn't just stop at staple foods. He talks about as well the types of meat. They're not given rotten meat and this. They're given meat, that same type of meats that everyone else is eating. What's normal in that particular land or country. No, they don't have to go out and buy for them filet mignon and all the rest of that stuff. But those things that everyone else in the country eats, this is what is an obligation in Islam for the one that owns a slave to feed their slave or slaves. This is completely different than what they try to compare slavery in Islam to. It's completely different. Also, when it comes to al-kaswa, they talk about the type of clothing that the slave has to be given. He says it has to be min ghalib kaswatihim, that it has to be the type of clothes that most people wear. We don't have the people that are walking around the town and this, that, and the other walking around in nice clothes and the slaves walking around in rags. Look at the rahmah and the mercy in Islam. These people are made to work for these individuals, but they're taken care of. And not just taken care of, just given any old thing. They're given the same foods that everyone eats. They're taken care of. Do you understand? They're not beaten and all the rest of the stuff, and we'll get into some of that in a minute. But look at what Allah legislated for people that enter into these contracts dealing with slavery. This is nothing like what they try to compare it to. And they say, okay, they try to justify what has happened in history because they say, okay, well, the Muslims did it too. No, that which was known by the Muslims was completely different than that which they're trying to compare it to. It's night and day and apples and oranges. As well, we're talking about the situation of the clothing. Like we said, they get clothing like everyone else, and it's not just enough just to cover their awrah, but they get real clothes. They get clothes that are going to cover them and not just certain parts of their bodies and just enough to, get by, and they're running around half the streets half naked and all the rest of that stuff. This is not permissible in Islam. It's haram, it's a sin, and you've been commanded as a Muslim to do better than this. Other than this, it's not permissible. So again, this is completely different than what they're trying to compare it to. Look again at the rahmah of your religion. This should make you feel proud. No more walking around with your head down saying, okay, well, listen, if the Muslims were dealing with this, this and that. Look at what the people that were in these situations of slavery, look at their situation. They were paid for. They were given nice food, good food, clothing, shelter, things along these sorts. And we're going to get into a little bit more. First and foremost, look at the rahmah that came in your religion. Second of all, understand that just because it's called the same thing in our language doesn't mean that this was that. Also, it says, he says, وَلَا يُكَلِّفُونَ مِنَ الْعَمَلِ مَا لَا يَطِيقُونَهُ. He says that, and it's not permissible, that they are not to be given more responsibility or more to be put on them than they can bear. No carrying big boulders that you can't carry and all the rest of this. They do normal work. We don't make it an obligation on them. As a matter of fact, it's an obligation on us not to give them more than they can do. He says, وَإِذَا اسْتَعْمَلَ الْمَالِكَ الرَّقِيقَ. He says, and if the owner, the one that possessed the slave, if he used him during the daytime, he gave him a break at night. It wasn't okay, sun up to sundown and then go somewhere else and work from sundown to sun up and get an hour or two. It was none of that. He's describing, everything he's describing here is rahmah, is mercy. This is nothing like what they're trying to compare it to. So stop feeling ashamed and saying, okay, well listen, if the Muslims were dealing with this, it wasn't right. No. First and foremost, as a Muslim, we can't believe that what the Muslims were dealing with wasn't right. That was legislated. There were things that the Muslims did that weren't legislated that they weren't right. But things that were legislated, they were right. And you see all of the rahmah, the mercy. People were getting taken care of. Yes, people were working, but they were being taken care of. They were given good food, good clothes. Now we know that they were given times in which they worked and didn't work. If they worked during the day, then they rested at night. If they worked during the night, then they rested during the day. He said, وَأَقْصُ. Like I just said, if they worked during the night, then they rested during the day. He says, وَيُرِيهُهُ سَيْفًا وَقْتَ الْقِيلُولَةِ. He said, and he gives them a break during the summertime. Because it's really hot during the summertime. وَقْتَ الْقِيلُولَةِ. Some of you know what a qaylula is and some of you don't. The qaylula is the mid-noon nap. It's generally when everybody relaxes because it's so hot in the middle of the day. It's the hottest part of the day. He says he gives them a break during that time. The time for the qaylula. Those of you who have lived over here in the Arab lands, you'll know in a lot of the Arab lands, especially in the Gulf countries, there's a lot of places during the time of the qaylula, even businesses shut down. You don't see any cars in the streets and all of the rest of that stuff. It's the hottest part of the day. People usually go home and they relax and things along these sorts, and then they go back to work. Do you understand? So, because of the fact that it's the hottest part of the day, even though they're a slave, they're given a break during this hottest part of the day. What is this but mercy? They're trading their work to be fed, to be clothed, to be housed under law. You can't do this and you can do this and you have to do this in order for that slave to be yours. This is nothing like that which they're trying to compare it to. And here that after this, they start talking about something else, but we need to understand that, yes, you have a lot of people that try to look at certain things in Islam and they try and say, well, listen, they try to compare that which is evil to something that they know is from Islam. Brothers and sisters, you have to stop getting fooled by people calling things something. Yes, it's all called slavery. But is what we talked about today, is what Ibn Qasim said today, or what he said in his book long ago, is this a slavery that we know of? Is this what we've heard people talking about and people up in the uproar about and all of the rest of this for generations and generations? No, it's not. It's the same name, but it's something completely different. So make sure that you explain this to people. You let them know this is not that. You let them know about the rahmah that even in this situation that doesn't exist in a lot of our societies today, let alone back then, when slavery was running rampant throughout the world. You need to let them know that your religion legislated to be done in another way, and those ways that aren't legislated, we're free from them and we're free from the people that practice those things. Or our deen is free from the people that practice those things, I should say. Do you understand? Understand that everything that was legislated in your religion was a rahmah, was a mercy to mankind. There's nothing that you need to be embarrassed about. Everything that Allah legislated was only legislated so that mankind can find happiness in this life and the hereafter. So because someone else comes and brings something and they name it the same thing that we may name it in Islam, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same. We need to start being able to differentiate between this and that. And this is what's going to come in our studies. May Allah Ta'ala allow us to be of those people who study this religion, are able to explain it to the people and understand it and appreciate that which was sent down to us. Ameen, ameen, Allahumma ameen. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.